Ben Pearson, the Roadster Tracker, and today let's continue our studies into the environmental effects of various kinds of power generation. And today we're going to talk about coal. Now, first of all, what is coal actually? And this took me a little bit of work to understand, but coal is when you have organic material that kind of sets to the bottom of a swamp or sea, and it forms something called peat. Now, this peat with time will compress, get the water out of it, form a nice rock that is hard, that is basically consisting of organic material that's called coal. You can kind of think of it as wood in a lot of ways. It's pretty similar, but wood that has been very much pressurized. The reason why coal is black for the most part is the carbon content. That is what tends to release the most energy. Only about 80 to 90% though of coal will actually burn. The rest of it, which they generically call minerals, will not burn. And some of that stuff that's in there is actually pretty nasty. There's a fair bit of mercury in there, for instance, and some other pretty nasty chemicals. Let's start first of all from a power plant perspective. Building a coal-fired power plant requires nothing more than steel and concrete. It's nothing really too dangerous at all. They're pretty standard off the shelf. It's not more dangerous than really any building in and of itself, just to build the power plant. Let's talk about mining the coal. The act of mining the coal, depending on how you do it, if you do an above ground system where you're just tearing through the mountains, you're going to cause a lot of ecological damage, but it's safer for the miners. If you have an underground system, then the miners are breathing in coal dust, which is actually some pretty nasty stuff. So they're a little more likely to have health issues than you would otherwise. But on the flip side, it's less ecological damage. The amount of coal that we need to mine to keep this country running is immense. About 10 times the amount of iron that we need to keep the country running. So we're sitting there mining coal all the time just to keep the lights on. And it's a really big deal. Because they're mining so much, you're going to have more mining accidents than you would otherwise. And it can be some fairly dangerous stuff. About 60 people in the United States die to mining accidents on average every year. Sometimes you'll hear about them, usually when it's a bunch of people all at once, but a number of people die. More than that, though, people dying from some kind of mining-related illness happens quite a bit more, and I don't have the exact number, but it's in the maybe hundreds per year. They don't really track this as carefully. So the act of mining coal is a pretty dangerous one. Let's talk about actually burning it. Well, the burning of the coal itself, the actual good parts of it that will produce energy, produces carbon dioxide in large amounts. It's of any of the major fossil fuels, it's the one that produces the most of these. So that is something to be concerned about, although I'm going to talk about more of that when we are comparing the various forms of power directly. I just want to talk about the kind of major ecological damages that are unique to coal in this video. The problem with coal, though, is the unburnt parts of it. Some of it will come up out of the smokestack in the form of ash. This ash has all kinds of nasty particles in it. It will tend to cause some significant breathing problems, especially for those who are sensitive and live within a couple of miles of a coal power plant. So if you have asthma or something like that, do your best to not live within 2 miles of a coal power plant, because bad stuff will happen. They release a fair bit of radioactivity. There's mercury that's in here, the largest source of mercury additions in really since we started recording this into the environment has happened because of coal-fired power plants. You can actually see this in the fish, especially in carnivore type fish, that fish. The more that they are eating other fish, the more mercury they tend to have in their system, so it's something to be aware of. This can cause some pretty nasty stuff. It's very toxic chemical. But for the most part, it's not something you see all the time. It's estimated in the United States that there are thousands of deaths due to the air-released carbon or other materials that come from the burning of coal every year. Think about that. Thousands in the United States. That's more than died from Chernobyl during all of the radiological effects. They're estimated around 3,000, maybe a little bit more. But still, no matter how you look at it, in a couple of years' time in the United States, more people die from coal than do from Chernobyl. The other major problem is the waste product. This is something I didn't really realize until I started studying it. Coal does not burn completely cleanly. If you are lighting a campfire, you'll know that there's some kind of ash that's left behind. Well, when you burn coal, the same thing happens. It's not a clean thing that burns completely. Something has to happen with this waste. This waste is considered household waste, even though it contains a number of hazardous chemicals. It is not something I would want to be touching at all. It's pretty nasty stuff. It's the second largest form of waste next to household goods in the United States. The ways that they dispose of this vary quite a bit. They can actually use some of this to help make roads, which is a good use for it. That'll lock it up in place and make it do something actually useful. But a lot of this is just stored. And this stored waste is just nasty, nasty stuff. They'll dig a hole in the ground. They may have like a barrier to kind of keep it in place. If these barriers ever fail, then some nasty stuff can happen. I think there was one incident here in the United States where one of these barriers failed and like a dozen people died immediately. Plus, it caused a huge amount of ecological damage. This is a significant problem. If you look at any coal-fired power plant, they'll actually just dump this right on the ground. This stuff is pretty nasty, and it is somewhat hazardous, even though it's not considered hazardous waste, at least in the United States. Still, it's something to be concerned of and keep an eye on. And the bottom line is coal is some pretty nasty stuff when you burn it. And of any of the major forms of power, once we can get rid of coal-fired power plants, then our health will go much, much better. The alternatives that are out there are much cleaner. Coal has some advantages, but overall, we're just better off getting rid of it if we can manage to make that happen. Thank you guys very much for joining me. Let me know whatever questions or comments you guys have. Thank you to those people in my Discord who helped me to put these together, and my Patreons who helped me to fund my efforts to upgrade my studio, as you will be seeing over the next few weeks. You can find links below if you're interested in more. Thanks for everything, and until next time, keep on tracking. Take care.